"You look lonely, and I'm tired of crying alone," said the homeless girl to the giant rancher. Snow whips across the frontier town as a ragged girl dares to speak to the most feared, most solitary man in the valley. The townsfolk laugh, but then fall silent because this giant doesn't walk away. He lifts her onto his horse, and everything changes. But kindness in the West comes with a price. The railroad wants his land. The deputies want him in irons. And the girl, half Cherokee, half outcast, holds secrets that could shatter everything he thought he knew about family, faith, and home. As church bells toll and jail keys rattle, one question echoes louder than a thunder of hooves across the mountains. Will this lonely rancher fight for the girl who dared to need him, or will the West tear them apart forever? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The snow fell in thick curtains across Main Street, coating the Colorado town in deepening white. Samuel Boone's massive frame cast a long shadow as he secured his horse's reins to the hitching post outside Jenkins' General Store. His weathered hands moved with practiced ease, though his shoulders carried the weight of years spent alone. Street had emptied as the storm rolled in, save for a small figure hunched on the church steps. Ana Mae pulled her thin shawl tighter, her mixed Cherokee and white heritage earning her nothing but cold shoulders from the townsfolk who hurried past. Her cracked shoes offered little protection from the growing drifts. Samuel felt the familiar weight of stairs following his movements. Mrs. Peterson whispered behind her, hand to Miss Clark, as they watched from the millinery shop window. "That's the giant widower, Boone. Hasn't spoken more than 2 words together since his Sarah passed. 3 years alone up in that big ranch house," Miss Clark replied. "Ain't natural for a man to live that way." Samuel's jaw tightened as he moved past the church steps. He'd grown used to the whispers, the sideways glances, the way folks gave him a wide berth. His size had always drawn attention, but his grief had made him a figure of mystery and gossip. "You look lonely," a clear voice rang out, stopping him mid-stride. "And I'm tired of crying alone." The street fell silent. Ana Mae's words hung in the frigid air like icicles. A few townsmen chuckled nervously, while others shook their heads at her boldness. Speaking to the giant widower this way, it wasn't done. Samuel turned slowly, studying the girl's trembling form. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and her dark eyes held a familiar pain he recognized all too well. How many nights had he sat alone in his empty house, grief his only companion? Without a word, he stepped toward her. The watching crowd held their breath as his massive figure loomed over Ana's slight frame. Then, with unexpected gentleness, his rough hands lifted her from the steps as easily as a father might scoop up his child. "You won't sleep cold tonight, little one," he said, his deep voice barely above a whisper as he settled her onto his horse. The whispers erupted like a swarm of angry bees. "Did you see that? Taking in that half-breed girl? What will Reverend Matthews say?" Samuel ignored them all, leading his horse through the thickening snow. Ana Mae's head gradually came to rest against his greatcoat as exhaustion overtook her. Each step took them further from the judgmental eyes of town. Following the winding path to his ranch, the kitchen door creaked in protest as Samuel pushed it open, the first time it had moved on its hinges since Sarah's passing. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as he lit the old oil lamp, illuminating Sarah's domain exactly as she'd left it. The copper pots still hung in their precise order, her favorite blue-checked curtains still graced the window, and her Bible lay untouched on the shelf. His throat tightened as he moved through the space, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. Soon, the pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat while a pot of beans simmered with a chunk of salt pork. He pulled out Sarah's best china, something he hadn't been able to touch since the funeral, and set it before Ana Mae at the worn oak table. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of the fine dishes, her fingers trembling as she traced the delicate pattern. "It's been so long since I ate from real plates," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Samuel turned away, busying himself with cutting thick slices of bread. He couldn't bear to see the same lost look he'd carried for so long reflected in her young face. Yet something had shifted when she'd called out to him, naming the loneliness they shared. Her words had pierced the armor of his solitude, reaching the part of him he'd thought died with Sarah and their infant son. As he set the simple meal before her, Samuel realized this girl hadn't just changed his evening, she'd changed his life. The kitchen, silent for so long, now held the quiet sounds of spoons against china and the gentle crackle of the stove. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Aina May bowed her head briefly before eating, murmuring words in Cherokee that Samuel didn't understand. But he recognized the gesture of grace, the same way Sarah had always paused to give thanks before meals. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, warmth began to seep back into the old ranch house. One careful spoonful at a time, dawn's first light filtered through the frosted kitchen windows, casting long shadows across Samuel's worn floorboards. He paused in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space as he observed Aina May still slumped at his kitchen table. She hadn't moved from her spot, her thin shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders as she slept. The sight stirred something in his chest, a feeling he'd sworn never to entertain again. After Sarah and their infant son died, he'd made a solemn vow. No more strays, no more chances for heartbreak. Yet Aina's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. "You look lonely, and I'm tired of crying alone." Samuel moved quietly to the stove, his boots making the old boards creak despite his care. The sound roused Aina, who blinked awake with a start, momentarily confused by her surroundings. "Morning," Samuel muttered, stoking the dying embers back to life. He added, kindling, watching the flames catch and grow. "Morning, Mr. Boone," Aina replied softly, straightening in her chair. Her dark eyes followed his movements with cautious attention. Samuel set about making breakfast, pulling out cornmeal and the last of his salt pork. The familiar routine helped steady his thoughts. "Can't stay here forever," he said gruffly, more to himself than to her. "I understand, sir." Aina's voice was steady despite its softness. "Truth is, I ain't got nowhere else to go." Samuel turned from the stove, studying her face. She met his gaze without flinching. "My pa was a drifter, died 2 winters back. Mama was Cherokee." Aina's fingers twisted in her shawl. "She taught me her songs, her stories. But she took fever last spring, and," she swallowed hard, "tried the boarding houses in town. None'll take me on account of being mixed." Samuel stirred the cornmeal, letting the silence stretch between them. He'd heard the townsfolk's whispers about the half-breed girl, seen how they crossed the street to avoid her. It wasn't right, but then little had seemed right since Sarah's passing. "You can stay," he finally muttered, setting a bowl before her. "Just until you get your strength back, mind. This ain't permanent." Aina nodded, accepting the bowl with careful hands. "Much obliged, Mr. Boone." After breakfast, Samuel pulled on his heavy coat. The morning air bit cold and sharp as he headed to the barn to saddle his horse. The woodpile was running low. He'd need to haul more before the next storm hit. Crunch of snow behind him made him turn. Aina stood there, wrapped in her threadbare shawl, determination written across her young face. "I can help," she said simply. Samuel shook his head. "Wood hauling ain't girl's work. I'm stronger than I." "Look," Aina stepped forward, her chin set stubbornly. "And I aim to earn my keep." Something in her stance reminded him of Sarah, that same quiet strength that wouldn't back down from what needed doing. Without a word, he tossed her a spare pair of work gloves. They engulfed her small hands, but she pulled them on without complaint. Throughout the morning, Aina proved her words true. Though the kindling nearly overwhelmed her arms, she insisted on carrying load after load. She worked steadily, her breath clouding in the cold air, never once complaining about the weight or the distance. As evening settled in, they sat before the crackling fire. Samuel noticed Ana's fingers moving in her lap, as though keeping time to some unheard rhythm. Then, soft as a whisper, she began to hum. The melody was strange to his ears, a Cherokee lullaby. He realized something her mother must have sung to her. The sound of music in his home hit Samuel like a physical blow. Sarah had always sung while she worked, hymns, folk songs, lullabies to their infant son. Since their passing, the silence had been his only companion. Now this girl's gentle humming filled the empty spaces, stirring memories he'd tried so hard to bury. "Time for bed," he said abruptly, his voice rougher than intended. Ana's humming stopped mid-note. "Remember what I said. This is temporary. Can't keep you here forever." Ana rose from her spot by the fire, nodding solemnly. But as she headed toward the kitchen where her shawl lay draped over her chair, she paused. "Thank you for one warm night, Mr. Boone," she whispered. Samuel stood motionless, watching her curl up in her chair again. The words caught in his throat, all the reasons why she couldn't stay, why he couldn't risk caring again. Instead, he turned away, leaving the kitchen lamp burning low as he retreated to his cold bedroom. The next morning dawned bitter cold. Samuel hitched up his wagon while Ana stood nearby, pulling Sarah's old shawl tighter around her thin shoulders. He'd found it in a trunk last night, unable to watch the girl shiver any longer in her threadbare wrap. "Time to head to town," Samuel said gruffly. "Need feed for the horses, and you can return that shawl while we're there." Ana's fingers traced the soft wool. "It's mighty kind of you to lend it, Mr. Boone." The wagon creaked as they rode into town, frost crackling under the wheels. Samuel noticed how folks stopped to stare, their whispers carrying on the crisp air. Outside the mercantile, Mrs. Patterson drew her children closer as they passed, as if Ana's presence might somehow taint them. "Look at that. Boone's taken in the half-breed girl," someone muttered, loud enough to carry. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward. Other voices carried different tones. Old Widow Jenkins nodding approvingly, and Reverend Thomas touching his hat with what looked like respect. Inside the general store, Samuel was measuring out feed when a shadow fell across the counter. Mr. Keating stood there, his Eastern-cut suit pristine despite the dusty shop. The railroad agent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Boone," Keating said smoothly, "I've been hoping to have a word. The railroad's taking quite an interest in that valley of yours, particularly that water access." Samuel straightened to his full height, towering over the smaller man. "Not interested." "Now, don't be hasty." Keating's voice hardened slightly. "Progress is coming, whether folks like you want it or not. Best to be on the right side of it. My land ain't for sale." Samuel's tone could have frozen water. He paid for his feed and turned his back on Keating, finding Ana by the door. Her face showed she'd heard every word. The wagon ride home was quiet for a long while. Finally, Ana spoke, her voice small against the winter wind. "Mr. Boone, do people always look at me that way, like I'm something wrong?" Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. He wanted to lie to spare her, but found he couldn't. "Some folks carry prejudice deep in their bones," he said slowly. "But you face them with more courage than they've got themselves. That's what shamas them." Ana nodded, looking down at her worn boots. "Mama said dignity don't cost nothing, but it's worth everything." Back at the ranch, Ana insisted on helping with supper. Samuel watched as she moved around his kitchen, measuring out beans, adding salt pork to the pot. Her movements were sure, practiced, so different from his own clumsy attempts since Sarah died. The memory of Sarah in the same kitchen, humming as she cooked, hit him like a physical blow. She'd always moved with that same grace, that same quiet confidence. Samuel muttered an excuse and stepped outside. Letting the cold air sting his lungs, he stood there until the sun touched the mountains, fighting the ache in his chest. When he finally returned inside, Aina had the table set, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, the bean pot steaming between them. "Been a while since I ate proper at a table," Aina said softly as they sat down. "Not since Mama, well, much obliged for letting me. Sit at yours." Samuel grunted, stirring his beans. "You're underfoot anyway. Might as well feed you." But something warm stirred in his chest at her words, at the sight of someone else at his table again. It scared him, that warmth. Made him want to push it away, wall it up like he had everything else these past years. That night, after Aina had curled up in her kitchen chair with Sarah's shawl, Samuel sat alone in his room. For the first time since burying his wife and son, he felt the urge to pray. The words came slow, rusty from disuse. "Lord," he whispered, "I ain't talked to you in a long spell. Ain't been sure you were listening." He paused, struggling. "Don't know what you mean, sending this girl my way." "Don't know if I can," his voice cracked. "Just help me do right by her. Help me remember what Sarah would have done." The only answer was the winter wind keening around the eaves, but something in Samuel's chest felt lighter, like a fist slowly unclenching. He sat there a long while, listening to Aina's soft breathing from the kitchen, before finally seeking his own rest. 2 days passed like molasses in winter. Samuel watched Aina from the corner of his eye as she moved about his kitchen, setting things right in ways he'd long forgotten. The girl needed proving, he reckoned. No place on a working ranch for someone who couldn't pull their weight. "Time. You earned your keep," he announced that morning, his voice gruff. "Got chores need doing." Anna straightened her spine, nodding firmly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Boone." The well had frozen overnight, its handle stiff with ice. Samuel demonstrated how to break through the crust, then stepped back to watch. Aina gripped the pump with both hands, her small frame straining against the resistant metal. The handle barely budged. "Ain't no shame in giving up," Samuel offered, seeing her struggle. But Aina set her jaw, repositioned her feet, and threw her whole body into the effort. The pump creaked, protesting, then gave way with a sudden gush of water. Some splashed her dress, but she kept pumping until the bucket was full. "Reckon that'll do," Samuel said, hiding his surprise at her determination. Her hands were red from cold and effort, but she didn't complain once. Later that morning, Samuel found her in the barn, examining his old saddle. "Straps torn," she pointed out, fingers tracing the worn leather. "I can fix that if you've got needle and thread." He fetched Sarah's old sewing kit, watching as Aina selected a heavy needle and waxed thread. Her stitches were small and even, just like his wife's had been. When she finished, the repair looked stronger than the original leather. "My mama taught me," Aina explained, seeing his expression. "Said a body's got to know how to mend what's broken." The afternoon brought cattle feeding, the hardest work yet. Samuel loaded hay into the wagon while Aina struggled with armfuls that seemed bigger than herself. The icy wind cut through their coats as they worked, Aina's small form looking like a child's next to his giant frame. But she kept pace, her determination showing in every step. As evening settled in, they sat before the fire, bowls of stew warming. Their hands. Samuel found himself talking more than he had in years, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "Sarah loved this time of day," he said quietly, surprising himself. "She'd sit right there in that chair, singing to our boy." He paused, the familiar ache rising in his chest. Neither of them survived the fever. James was only 6 months old. Aina listened with dark, serious eyes. "That's a heavy burden to carry." "Alone, Mr. Boone. Been carrying it 5 years now." Samuel stared into the flames. Figured it was easier staying lonely than risking more hurt. I talk to my mama sometimes, Ana admitted softly. At night, when the missing gets too big. Ask her what I should do, where I should go. She traced patterns on her bowl with one finger. Reckon she led me to your door that snowy day. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. Before he could respond, a sharp knock rattled the door. Evening, Mr. Boone. Keating's smooth voice oozed through the doorway as Samuel opened it. Behind him stood two deputies, their badges catching the lamplight. Sorry to interrupt your family supper. Samuel's shoulders tightened at the mockery in Keating's tone. State your business. Just delivering some papers. Keating held out an official-looking document. The railroad's claim to your water rights has been approved. You'll need to vacate the property within 30 days. Like hell I will. Samuel's massive hand closed around the paper, crumpling it into a ball. Now, Mr. Boone, Keating's smile turned cold. Destroying legal documents won't help your case. The law's the law. Ana stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale with fear. Samuel could read the thought in her eyes. She'd be homeless again if they lost the ranch. His jaw clenched as he stared down at Keating. This land's been mine 15 years, Samuel growled. The water rights came with it, legal and proper. You ain't taking what's mine. We'll see about that. Keating tipped his hat with mock politeness. 30 days, Mr. Boone. I suggest you use them wisely. He turned to go, then paused. Oh, and do consider what's best for your ward. Shame if she had to go back to sleeping on church steps. After they left, Samuel stood at the door for a long moment, the crumpled paper still in his fist. Behind him, he heard Anna's shaky breath. They can't really take it, can they? She whispered. Samuel turned to face her, his expression set like granite. No, he said firmly. They can't, and they won't. He tossed the wadded paper into the fire, watching it catch and burn. This is our home, girl, and we're going to fight for it. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Colorado mountains. Samuel cinched his horse's saddle with determined hands while Ana watched from the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. The railroad's crumpled eviction notice lay heavy in his coat pocket, a constant reminder of yesterday's threat. Best come along, Samuel called to Ana. Might need a witness to what's said. They rode double into town, the horses' hooves crunching through patches of leftover snow. Samuel's jaw remained set like iron, his back straight as a fence post. Ana held tight to his coat, sensing the tension in his massive frame. The sheriff's office sat quiet at the end of the dusty street. Samuel helped Ana down, then strode through the door with purpose, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Sheriff Whitlock looked up from his desk, his weathered face showing no surprise at the early visitors. Figured you'd be coming, Whitlock said, setting aside his coffee cup. Heard about Keating's visit yesterday. Samuel pulled the wrinkled papers from his pocket, spreading them flat on the sheriff's desk. Need you to look at this claim they're making. It ain't right, and you know it. Whitlock picked up the documents, studying them with careful eyes while morning sun streamed through his office window. His frown deepened as he read, and he kept shifting in his chair like a man sitting on thorns. They've got themselves some fancy lawyers, Samuel, the sheriff said finally. This here's all legal looking. They've cited water rights statutes I ain't even heard of. I've got the original deed, Samuel insisted, his voice rising. Filed my water rights proper, 15 years back. Got everything signed and witnessed. According to law. Whitlock set the papers down, looking tired. Listen, Samuel. These railroad men, they've got powerful friends. Money, too, more than you and me will ever see. They're backing this new railroad spur like it's God's own mission. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. My advice? Take whatever settlement they offer. Ain't worth the fight. Samuel's massive hands curled into fists on the sheriff's desk. So that's it? Law just bends whichever way money pushes it? Now, Samuel, Whitlock started. But Samuel was already turning away, Ana hurrying to keep up with his long strides. Outside, Samuel's frustration exploded. His fist crashed against the hitching post with enough force to make the whole thing shudder. Several passers-by jumped at the sound, hurrying past with averted eyes. Ana stepped close, laying her small hand on his trembling arm. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, "you ain't alone in this fight." Samuel looked down at her earnest face, feeling some of his anger drain away. She stood straight and proud despite her worn dress, every bit as determined as him. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thought. As soon as they arrived, Samuel strode to his bedroom, emerging with an old strongbox. The metal creaked as he opened it, revealing yellowed papers carefully preserved. "Here it is," he said, pulling out the original deed. Every signature, every filing, all proper and legal. His fingers traced the faded ink. "This land is mine, fair and square, and I aim to prove it." That evening, Ana announced she would make cornbread for supper. Samuel watched from his chair as she measured flour and cornmeal, her face scrunched in concentration. The kitchen soon filled with warm, promising smells, but when Ana pulled the skillet from the oven, her face fell. "It's all burnt on the bottom," she said, disappointed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Boone. I ain't used to cooking with such a hot stove." To her surprise, Samuel reached for a piece anyway. He took a big bite of the blackened bread, then did something that startled them both. He chuckled. The sound was rusty, from disuse but genuine. "Reckon I've eaten worse," he said, still smiling. "At least the top half ain't burnt." Ana's eyes widened at his laughter, then she smiled too, relief washing over her face. Later, as the fire crackled low in the hearth, Ana knelt beside her chair. Samuel watched curiously as she folded her hands and closed her eyes. "Dear God," she prayed softly, "please give Mr. Boone strength for this fight. Help him stand strong against those who'd take his home. And thank you for giving me a warm place to sleep, even if I can't cook proper yet." Samuel felt something catch in his throat at her simple words. He hadn't heard a prayer spoken in his house since Sarah died, hadn't wanted to. But Ana's voice held such honest faith that it touched something long buried in his heart. When the time came for bed, Samuel carefully tucked the deed into his shirt, close to his chest. He extinguished the lantern, but lay awake for a long time, thinking about Ana's prayer and the fight ahead. Perhaps, he thought, he wasn't as alone as he'd believed. Sunday morning dawned crystal clear, the winter sun casting long shadows across the fresh-fallen snow. Samuel stood before his clouded mirror, fumbling with his tie, watching his reflection grow frustrated. He hadn't worn his good clothes in so long. They felt stiff and foreign on his broad frame. Ana appeared in the doorway, wearing her cleanest dress despite its patches. She had braided her dark hair neatly, though a few stubborn strands escaped. Around her face, "Let me help," she offered quietly, stepping forward to straighten his tie with careful fingers. Samuel cleared his throat. "Reckon it's time you had a proper place in town," he said gruffly. "Church seems a good place to start." They rode together through the crisp morning air, their breath forming clouds in the cold. The church bell tolled across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. As Samuel helped Ana down from the horse, he noticed how she squared her shoulders, lifting her chin despite the stares already beginning from early arrivals. The whispers started as soon as they entered the church. Samuel heard them clearly, harsh murmurs that rippled through the pews like wind through dry grass. He felt Ana stiffen beside him, but admired how she kept her head high. Walking straight down the aisle to an empty bench near the back, Reverend Alden stood at his pulpit, shuffling his papers with nervous energy. His sermon that morning focused on Christian charity, speaking at length about helping the less fortunate. Yet throughout his passionate words about loving thy neighbor, the preacher's eyes skipped carefully over Samuel and Ana's corner of the church, as if they were invisible. Love thy neighbor, the Reverend proclaimed, his voice rising. Show mercy to the stranger at your gate. But his carefully chosen words rang hollow in the stuffy air of the church, weighted by what remained unsaid. After the final hymn, Samuel guided Anna toward the door, hoping to make a quiet exit. But the whispers had grown bolder, carrying clearly in the winter air. Lost his mind completely, one woman muttered behind her hymnal. Taking in wild blood like that, another agreed. No good will come of it. Samuel's jaw clenched, but Anna's presence beside him kept him moving forward. They stopped at Whitaker's general store, needing supplies for the week ahead. But Mr. Whitaker, who had always extended Samuel credit before, now stood stiff-backed behind his counter. "Sorry, Boone," he said, though his tone held no trace of apology. "Can't offer credit no more. Not with you harboring wild blood under your roof. Bad for business, you understand." Samuel's massive frame went rigid, his hands curling into fists at his sides. The merchant took an involuntary step back, but his sneer remained fixed in place. Just as Samuel opened his mouth to respond, he felt Anna's small hand touch his arm. "Let's leave in peace," she whispered, her voice steady despite the hurt in her eyes. "Please." The touch of her hand and the quiet dignity in her voice doused Samuel's anger like water on hot coals. Without a word, he turned and led her out of the store, leaving the merchant's prejudice behind them. Back at the ranch, Samuel paced the wooden floors like a caged bear, his heavy boots marking time with his anger. The injustice of it all burned in his chest, the preacher's cowardice, the townspeople's cruelty, the merchant's spite. He had known there would be talk, but the open hostility cut deeper than he'd expected. Anna sat quietly by the fire, watching him pace. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I know what they think of me," she said, "but I'm grateful you let me stand beside you today." Samuel stopped his pacing, struck by her words. Here was this girl, bearing the weight of their scorn with more grace than any of them had shown, thanking him for simply treating her like a human being. The realization humbled him. "You showed more courage than the lot of them," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm proud to have stood beside you." They shared their evening meal in comfortable silence, bowls of hot stew warming their hands. The fire crackled in the hearth, holding the winter wind at bay. Samuel looked across the table at Anna, really seeing her, this brave, dignified girl who had somehow worked her way past his defenses. He realized with sudden clarity that he was no longer eating alone, no longer drowning in the silence that had filled his house for so many years. The warmth he felt had nothing to do with the fire, and everything to do with the quiet strength of the child sitting across from him, sharing his bread and his burden with equal grace. The week brought a rhythm of hard work to the ranch. Each morning, Samuel rose before dawn, stoking the kitchen fire to life. He'd find Anna already awake, determined to prove her worth. The cold sunshine found them walking the fence lines together, Samuel's giant shadow dwarfing her smaller one across the frozen ground. "Here's how you test for loose posts," Samuel demonstrated, his weathered hands gripping the wood. "Shake it. Firm-like. If it wobbles, we dig deeper." He watched as Anna mimicked his movements, her small fingers wrapping around the rough timber. Though her first attempts were clumsy, she never complained, even when splinters bit into her palms. In the barn, Samuel showed her how to stack hay bales, explaining the importance of proper storage. "Keep them off the ground," he instructed, laying down wooden pallets. "Damp'll rot them faster than you'd believe." Anna struggled with the weight at first, but day by day, her arms grew stronger. Samuel found himself catching her sometimes, practicing lifting smaller bales. When she thought no one was watching, the livestock needed constant attention in the winter cold. Samuel taught her how to check their water, breaking ice from troughs with a heavy mallet. "Animals need water same as we do," he explained, watching as Anna worked the tool with growing confidence. more so in this weather. She learned to recognize signs of illness in the cattle, to spot limping horses before they went lame. As dusk approached each evening, Ana's quiet humming filled the kitchen while she cooked. The familiar melodies of Cherokee lullabies drifted through the house, mingling with the crackle of the stove fire. Samuel found the tension in his shoulders easing when he heard her voice, though he'd never admit it aloud. One evening, as they shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Ana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Do you reckon," she said softly, "I might belong to a family again someday?" Her eyes stayed fixed on her plate, but Samuel caught the tremor in her voice. Question caught him off guard, stirring emotions he'd rather leave buried. He cleared his throat roughly, turning the conversation to tomorrow's chores instead. But later that night, as Ana dozed by the fireplace, blanket pulled tight against the cold, Samuel watched her peaceful face in the flickering light. Something tugged at his heart, a feeling he recognized as God's gentle prompting, one he hadn't felt in years. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Samuel planned to ride out to check the line shack, making sure winter storms hadn't damaged the roof. Before he could saddle up, Ana appeared in the barn, already wearing her borrowed coat. "I'm coming with you," she announced, her breath visible in the cold air. Something in her tone told Samuel argument would be useless. The trail to the line shack wound through stands of pine, their horses' hooves crunching in the packed snow. The silence between them felt comfortable, broken only by the occasional call of a winter bird. Finally Samuel spoke, surprising himself. "Used to pray every night," he said, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "After Martha, my wife, passed, I just stopped. Felt like God stopped listening, so I stopped talking." The words came slowly, like ice breaking up in spring. Ana sat quietly in her saddle for a long moment, considering his words. Then she turned to him, her dark eyes serious. "Maybe God sent me here so you'd start again," she said simply. The truth of her words struck Samuel like a physical blow. That evening, after Ana had gone to sleep, he knelt beside his bed for the first time in years. The words came rough and halting, like a rusty pump that hadn't been used in too long. "Lord," he whispered, "I ain't sure I remember how to do this proper anymore." His big hands twisted together as he searched for words. "But that girl, she makes me think maybe you ain't finished with me yet." Tears he didn't expect burned at the corners of his eyes. "Help me do right by her. Help me listen better when you're trying to tell me something." Standing up, Samuel looked around his bedroom. The house felt different now, no longer empty, and echoing with loss, but warm with new life. Down the hall, he could hear Ana's soft breathing as she slept by the fire. The sound filled spaces in his heart he'd thought would stay hollow forever. The change wasn't just in the house. He realized it was in him too, like spring thaw starting deep under winter ice. God's presence, so long pushed away, felt closer than it had in years, as close as the sound of Ana's humming in his kitchen, as real as her small hand in his as they checked. The fences together. Winter settled deeper over the Colorado Valley, wrapping Samuel's ranch in pristine white. The short days fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Samuel and Ana rose before the pale winter sun, working side by side until the early dusk painted the snow in purple shadows. In the barn, Samuel's massive hands worked at repairing an old wagon wheel, the wood worn smooth from years of use. The familiar scent of sawdust filled the air as he carefully shaped a new spoke. Through the open barn door, smoke curled from the chimney of his house. No longer just his house, he realized, but their home. The kitchen windows glowed with warmth as Ana attempted her first batch of biscuits. When Samuel stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots, the sight that greeted him brought an unexpected smile. Flour dusted Ana's dark hair like early frost, and the biscuits cooling on the table looked decidedly uneven. "They came out all wrong," Ana said, frowning at her creations. Then she caught Samuel's expression and burst into laughter, clear and bright as sleigh bells. "I reckon they'll taste the same, lopsided or not." Samuel found himself chuckling. Too, the sound rusty but real. "Reckon they will," he agreed, taking one of the misshapen biscuits. It was warm and surprisingly good, despite its appearance. That evening, after the chores were done and supper cleared away, Samuel noticed Anna standing at the window, gazing up at the crystal-clear sky. Stars glittered like ice chips in the velvet. Darkness. Without really planning to, he pulled on his coat and gestured for her to do the same. Outside, their breath frosted in the still air as Samuel pointed upward. "My pa taught me them stars when I was just a boy," he said quietly. "See there? That's the Big Dipper. And if you follow those two stars at the end," his finger traced the path, "they lead you to the North Star. Always shows you the way home." Anna stood close to his side, her small form seeking warmth against the cold. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the winter night, "God put us together so neither of us would be alone anymore." Samuel's words caught in his throat. The truth of her simple statement hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at this child who had somehow filled all the empty spaces in his home and his heart. But before he could respond, the moment shattered. The sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful silence. Samuel's head snapped up at the thunder of hooves, his body tensing. Through the gathering dusk, he made out several riders approaching the ranch house, railroad men, led by Keating. And behind them, the deputies' badges gleamed dully in the fading light. "Get inside," Samuel ordered Anna, pushing her toward the door, but it was too late. "Samuel Boone." Keating's voice rang out across the yard. "You're trespassing on company land. We have orders to remove you." The deputies dismounted, moving toward Samuel with grim determination. He stood his ground, massive frame rigid with defiance. "This is my land," he growled. "I have the deed. The deed's been invalidated." Keating cut him off with a smirk. "You're under arrest for trespassing and theft of company resources." Two deputies grabbed Samuel's arms. Despite his strength, they managed to force his hands behind his back, the cold iron of shackles biting into his wrists. Anna screamed, running forward to clutch at Samuel's coat. "No! You can't take him!" Her voice broke with terror and rage. One of the deputies roughly shoved her aside, sending her stumbling in the snow. "As for you, half-breed," he sneered, "there's a train leaving tomorrow. Government school teach you proper ways. Don't you touch her." Samuel roared, straining against the shackles. His face twisted with fury as he watched Anna sprawled in the snow. "She's just a child." The deputies dragged Samuel toward their horses, his boots leaving deep furrows in the snow. He fought every step, his voice thundering in the gathering dark. "Anna, don't let them take you. I'll come back for you." Anna scrambled to her feet, trying to run after them, but another deputy blocked her path. She could only watch as they forced Samuel onto a horse, binding his feet beneath the animal's belly. The group turned toward town, taking Samuel away into the deepening night. Left alone in the frozen yard, Anna's legs gave way. She collapsed to her knees in the trampled snow, her sobs echoing across the empty ranch. Above her, the stars sheened. Samuel had just been watching continued their cold, distant glitter. Indifferent to the way her world had just been torn apart, moonlight filtered through the barred window of the jail cell, casting iron shadows across Samuel's massive frame. His large hands gripped the cold metal bars as he knelt on the rough wooden floor. For the first time in years, words of prayer tumbled from his lips, halting but sincere. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I ain't asking for myself. Just keep Anna safe. Don't let them take her to that school. She's just a child, Lord. Your child." The cell felt as cold and empty as his ranch had been before. Anna arrived. Samuel's shoulders hunched as he remembered her small form sprawled in the snow, the deputy's cruel words about the government school. The thought of her alone in the bitter night tore at his heart. Across town, Aina pressed herself against the shadows of buildings, her heart pounding. She had spent hours watching the jail, studying the guards' movements. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. Our people survive by being clever, not just brave. The night wind cut through her thin shawl, but Aina barely noticed the cold. Her mind raced with memories of her mother's stories, particularly of a respected Cherokee elder who had helped their people navigate treaties with white settlers. Standing Elk, her mother had called him. A man who knew the old ways, but also understood the white man's laws. Aina took a deep breath, gathering her courage. The reservation border lay several miles outside town, where Standing Elk kept a small cabin. She would have to move quickly to reach it before dawn. Slipping through the darkness like a shadow, Aina made her way out of town. The moon cast enough light to follow the trail, though every rustle in the brush made her jump. Coyotes called. In the distance, their voices carrying across the snow-covered landscape. Her legs ached by the time she spotted Standing Elk's cabin. The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the horizon as Aina approached the small lodge. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of wood fire into the crisp morning air. Aina's hand trembled as she knocked on the wooden door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a tall man with gray-streaked hair and eyes that held both wisdom and wariness. Standing Elk studied her carefully before speaking. "You are far from town, young one," he said, his voice calm and measured. Aina straightened her spine, just as her mother had taught her. "Sir, I'm Aina May. My mother, she spoke of your wisdom. I need help. A good man's ranch is being stolen by the railroad, and he's in jail for protecting what's his." Standing Elk gestured for her to enter the warm cabin. Aina's frozen fingers tingled as she stepped closer to the fire. The elder listened intently as she explained about Samuel's ranch, the water rights, and the railroad's claims. When she finished, Standing Elk nodded slowly. "I remember this valley," he said. "The treaty that settled those lands. I was there when it was signed. The water rights were granted to individual settlers, not the railroad. I still have papers from those days." Hope blazed in Anna's chest. "Would you testify? Tell the sheriff what you know." "I will speak truth," Standing Elk promised, his eyes kind. It is time someone stood against the railroad's greed. Back in his cell, Samuel endured the deputy's taunts with quiet dignity. When a young guard brought his morning meal, Samuel thanked him politely, just as he would thank Aina at their supper table. "Ain't you angry?" the guard asked, surprised by Samuel's courtesy. Samuel looked at him steadily. "Anger won't prove what's right," he answered. As night fell again, Samuel heard a soft whisper from the high window. His heart leaped as he recognized Aina's voice. "Samuel, are you there?" He rushed to the window, reaching up toward the sound. "Aina, thank the Lord you're safe. Are you hiding? Have they tried to take you?" "I'm safe," she whispered back. "And I found help." Standing Elk, he remembers the treaty. He has papers proving your water rights. He'll testify tomorrow. Samuel's massive shoulders sagged with relief. Tears pricked his eyes as he recognized God's hand in this small miracle. "You brave girl," he whispered. "You wonderful, brave girl." Through the bars, Aina's small hand found his large one. "Have faith," she said softly. "God didn't bring us together just to let them tear us apart." Samuel squeezed her fingers gently, his faith kindling anew in his chest. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, the giant and the orphan girl, bound by something stronger than blood. Morning sunlight streamed through the church's stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the packed pews. Reverend Alden stood at his pulpit, his face drawn with concern as townsfolk filed in, their whispers echoing against the wooden walls. The meeting had been hastily called after growing murmurs of injustice reached his ears. The church door creaked. Open. 2 deputies marched Samuel Boone inside, his massive frame made even more imposing by the iron chains that bound his wrists. The congregation fell silent as Samuel was forced onto a simple wooden chair before them. Despite his bonds, he held himself with quiet dignity, his weathered face betraying no fear. Mr. Keating strode to the front, his polished boots clicking against the floorboards. A satisfied smile played at his lips as he withdrew a leather folder. From his coat. "Good people of the town," Keating announced, holding up several official-looking documents. "These papers clearly show the railroad's rightful claim to the water rights and grazing lands, currently occupied by this squatter." He gestured dismissively toward Samuel. Sheriff Whitlock shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his badge catching the morning light. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, many avoiding Samuel's steady gaze. Just as despair began to settle over the room like a heavy blanket, the back door swung open. Ana May stepped inside, her small figure framed by the doorway. Behind her stood a tall, distinguished Cherokee elder, Standing Elk. His silver hair gleamed in the church light, and he carried himself with natural authority that commanded attention. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Several women clutched their shawls tighter, while others simply stared. Ana held her head high as she led Standing Elk down the center aisle. The elder's moccasins made no sound as he approached the front. He paused before the assembly, his eyes sweeping across the faces before him. When he spoke, his voice carried clear and strong through the hushed church. "I was present when the treaty for this valley was signed," Standing Elk began. "My hair was black then, but my memory remains clear. The agreement guaranteed water and grazing rights to individual settlers who worked the land." He gestured toward Samuel. This man's claim was recognized by both Cherokee and white leaders. "We agreed to honor each other's use of the water and grass fairly." Keating scoffed, his face reddening. "Surely you don't expect us to take the word of I expect you to honor truth." Standing Elk interrupted firmly. "The same truth your own people put to paper." Samuel straightened in his chair. "The deed," he said, his deep voice resonating through the church. "Ana, check my coat pocket." Ana hurried forward, reaching into Samuel's coat. She withdrew a folded, yellowed document. With trembling fingers, she handed it to Sheriff Whitlock. The sheriff unfolded the paper carefully, studying it in the morning light. Minutes ticked by as he compared it to the railroad's documents. The congregation held its breath. Finally, Sheriff Whitlock cleared his throat. "The company's claim is flawed," he announced, his voice heavy with certainty. "This deed predates their filing, and the treaty rights are clear." He turned to the deputies. "Remove those chains." The sound of iron shackles falling to the floor echoed through the church. Samuel rose to his full height, rubbing his wrists. Ana couldn't contain herself any longer. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around Samuel's waist. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she pressed her face against his coat. The townsfolk watched in silence, many shifting uncomfortably as they witnessed the depth of feeling between the giant rancher and the small mixed-blood girl. Keating stormed from the church, his face dark with fury. As the door slammed behind him, Reverend Alden stepped down from his pulpit. "Perhaps," he said softly, "we have all been reminded today about the true meaning of justice and family." Later that evening, Samuel and Ana returned to the ranch. The familiar sight of home brought fresh tears to Ana's eyes. Samuel lit a lantern, setting it on the kitchen table. Its warm glow filled the room that had once been so dark and empty. Samuel's voice broke the peaceful silence. "Lord," he prayed. Aloud, his deep words filling the kitchen. "Thank you for delivering us. Thank you for sending help when we needed it most." Ana moved closer, her small voice joining his. "Thank you for giving us each other," she added softly. Their words mingled in the lantern-lit kitchen. the giant and the orphan girl, their prayers rising together like smoke from a warming fire. The late winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-dusted valley. Each morning brought more light, more warmth, as if nature itself celebrated the victory over the railroad schemes. Samuel and Ana fell into an easy rhythm on the ranch, though both felt the weight of curious eyes whenever they ventured into town. Samuel watched Ana lead the horses to water, her small figure wrapped in one of his old scarves. She moved with growing confidence, no longer the trembling girl from the church steps. Still, he noticed how she tensed whenever riders approached the property, as if expecting more trouble. The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention one crisp afternoon. Samuel straightened to his full height, protective, but recognized Tom and Martha Wilson, neighbors who had avoided his land since his wife's passing. Their wagon creaked to a stop in the yard. Martha climbed down first, clutching a covered basket. Her cheeks were pink with more than just cold as she approached. "Samuel," she said softly, "we brought some food. Fresh bread and preserves." She glanced at Ana, who had drawn closer to Samuel's side. "And a pie, if you'd care for it." Tom cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "Reckon we were wrong about some things, Samuel. The way we acted after Sarah passed. And lately, too." His eyes dropped to his boots. "Ain't right to judge without knowing the full story." Samuel studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly, his massive shoulders relaxing. "Much obliged," he said, accepting the basket without pride. "Would you care to come in for coffee?" Ana hurried ahead to stoke the fire and set out cups, her movements quick and precise. Samuel noticed how Martha watched the girl with softening eyes, especially when Ana remembered exactly how each person preferred their coffee. After the Wilsons left, more visitors trickled in over the following days. Some brought food, others offered help with spring planting. Each time, Ana's gentle presence seemed to ease the awkwardness, her quiet dignity making it impossible for them to cling to old prejudices. One sunny afternoon, Samuel led Ana to the branding corral. Several calves needed marking, and he decided it was time she learned this essential ranch skill. The branding iron glowed orange in the fire as he demonstrated the motion. "Steady and quick," he explained, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "That's the key." Ana's hands trembled as she gripped the iron. Samuel's enormous fingers enclosed hers, guiding her movement. "Like this," he murmured. "Don't be afraid." Together, they pressed the brand against the calf's flank. The animal bellowed and kicked, but Samuel's strength kept them both stable. When they pulled the iron away, a clean mark remained. Ana's face broke into a radiant smile. "I did it," she exclaimed, then quickly added, "with your help." "You did fine," Samuel assured her, his usual gruffness softened by pride. "Real fine." That evening, Ana stirred a pot of rabbit stew while Samuel mended tack by the fire. The kitchen was filled with warm light and the smell of fresh bread. Her baking had improved considerably since those first burned loaves. As they sat down to eat, Ana pushed her spoon through the stew, gathering courage. "Samuel?" she said. Finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Would it be all right if I stayed? Not just for now, but always?" Samuel's heart pounded against his ribs like a wild horse. He set down his spoon, looking at the small, brave face across the table, the face that had brought light back into his dark world, had brought him back to God, back to life. "Ana May," he said solemnly, "this door won't ever be closed to you again, not ever." He cleared his throat roughly. "This is your home now, long as you want it." Tears spilled down Ana's cheeks, but her smile could have lit the darkest night. She ducked her head, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, then straightened with quiet dignity. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being my family." After supper, Samuel went to the cupboard where Sarah's dishes were stored. He reached past the everyday plates to the back, where a special china plate had sat untouched for years. It was part of a wedding set, delicate and blue-rimmed. With careful hands, he brought it to the table and placed it at Anna's spot. "This here's yours now," he said gruffly. "Permanent-like." Anna touched the plate's smooth edge with wondering fingers, understanding the gift's deep meaning. A place at his table. A place in his heart. A new family, born from loss but strengthened by love. They sat together in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside, each lost in grateful thoughts. The kitchen that had once echoed with Samuel's solitary footsteps now held the warm presence of father and daughter, their hearts healing each other one day at a time. First warm breeze of spring whispered through the valley, melting snow into rivulets that trickled down the mountainsides. Morning sunlight painted the landscape in shades of gold and green as Samuel and Anna prepared for their weekly trip to town. Samuel noticed how Anna held herself differently, now no longer hunched against expected cruelty, but straight-backed and dignified. They rode side by side, his massive bay horse alongside her smaller pinto. The mud-splattered Main Street bustled with early morning activity as wagons rolled past and shopkeepers swept their wooden walkways. Samuel tied their horses at the hitching post outside the general store, his huge hands gentle on the reins. Bell above the door chimed as they entered. Samuel had to duck his head beneath the doorframe, as always. The familiar sense of coffee, leather, and tobacco filled the air. But something was different today. Instead of the usual hostile silence, genuine greetings met their ears. "Morning, Samuel," called Tom Wilson from near the seed bins. "Looks like good planting weather coming." Mrs. Peterson, arranging dry goods on a shelf, smiled and nodded at Anna. "Child, you're looking well. That ranch air agrees with you." Samuel's weathered face remained impassive, but Anna felt him relax beside her. They gathered their usual supplies, coffee, flour, sugar, ammunition, moving through the store with practiced efficiency. Other customers stepped aside respectfully, no longer turning their backs or pulling their children away. Near the door, they encountered Reverend Alden. The preacher's eyes held a hint of shame as he dipped his head. "Samuel, Anna May." His voice was quiet but carried clearly. "The Lord's blessings on you both." Samuel returned the greeting with a slight nod, noting how the minister's previous arrogance had been replaced by genuine humility. The transformation spoke volumes about how deeply recent events had affected the town's conscience. As Anna turned to leave, something caught Samuel's eye. On a shelf near the counter sat a display of newly arrived shawls. One in particular stood out, a beautifully woven piece in rich earth tones, decorated with traditional Cherokee patterns. The craftsmanship reminded him of the stories Anna had shared about her mother's people. "Wait here," he told her gruffly, then strode to the counter. The shopkeeper wrapped the shawl carefully in brown paper while Anna pretended not to watch, her eyes wide with curiosity. Outside in the spring sunshine, Samuel handed her the package without ceremony. "Go on," he said when she hesitated. "It's yours." Anna's fingers trembled as she unwrapped the paper. When the shawl unfurled, its colors seemed to dance in the light deep reds and browns like the valley's soil, blues like mountain shadows, golden yellow like sunrise. The Cherokee designs spoke of her heritage, a heritage Samuel wanted her to carry with pride. Pride. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Thank you." Her voice caught on the words, heavy with meaning beyond the gift itself. They rode home in comfortable silence, the new shawl draped across Anna's shoulders. The afternoon sun was sinking toward the mountains when they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. After tending to the horses, they settled into their evening routine, Anna preparing supper while Samuel built up the fire. The familiar sounds of home filled the kitchen, the crack and pop of burning wood, the clatter of pans, the soft whisper of Anna's skirts as she moved about. Samuel watched her stir the stew pot, her movements sure and comfortable in what had become her domain. The sight stirred something deep in his chest. "Aina," he said finally, his deep voice gentle, "need to tell you something." She turned wooden, spoon in hand, waiting. "After Sarah and the baby died, I reckoned my home died with them." His words came slowly, carefully chosen. "Thought nothing would ever grow here again, 'cept grief." He paused, working his jaw. "But you changed that. Gave me reason to live again, not just survive." Aina set down the spoon, her eyes bright with tears. "And you gave me a family when I had none," she answered softly. "A real home." The truth of it hung in the air between them, simple and profound. They were no longer two lonely souls seeking shelter from the storm. They were family, bound by choice and love rather than blood. They sat down to supper together, the firelight casting warm shadows on the walls. The new shawl hung proudly by the door alongside Samuel's coat, as if it had always belonged there. Outside, coyotes began their evening songs, their wild voices echoing across the valley. But inside the ranch house, peace reigned. The kitchen glowed with warmth and contentment, filled with the quiet joy of two hearts that had found their way home. Spring crept into the valley like a gentle awakening. Tender green shoots pushed through melting snow, and the morning air carried the sweet promise of warmth. Samuel and Aina rose before dawn each day, eager to prepare the ranch for planting season. They worked side by side, mending winter-damaged fences, Samuel's massive hand showing Aina how to stretch wire tight and secure posts. She learned quickly, her small fingers growing calloused but capable. Together they cleared tangles of brush, making way for new growth. Everywhere they looked, signs of renewal emerged: robin's eggs in hidden nests, tiny wildflower buds, and the first butterflies dancing on the breeze. When it came time to plow the fields, Aina insisted on helping despite Samuel's concern. She stumbled behind the heavy plow, her boots sliding in fresh-turned earth. But each time she fell, she got back up, determination bright in her eyes. Samuel watched her with growing pride, his heart full. "You're strong, girl," he said gruffly, steadying her after a particularly hard fall. "Strong as any I've known." The words brought color to her cheeks and new vigor to her steps. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in spring colors, wagons appeared on the road to the ranch. Samuel tensed at first, old wariness dying hard. But these were neighbors, the Petersons, the Wilsons, even old Jim Tucker, who rarely left his own property. They came bearing fresh-baked pies, tools, and willing hands. "After what the railroad tried," Tom Wilson said, shifting his hat, "well, we figured to show where we stand." The others nodded, offering awkward but sincere smiles. Samuel accepted their help with quiet gratitude, though his eyes sought Aina. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in her Cherokee shawl, and he knew it was her presence that had softened hearts and brought healing to more than just his own soul. Later, after the neighbors had gone home and night spread its star-filled blanket over the valley, Aina sat beside Samuel on the porch steps. "Do you ever worry about being lonely again?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel gazed at the stars wheeling overhead, then gently shook his head. "Got you now," he said simply. "That's enough." Aina's smile glowed in the gathering darkness. Soon she dozed off by the warmth of the fire inside, while Samuel sat in his chair, marveling at the mysterious ways God's mercy had found him. Through a child's courage and trust. Morning broke over the valley in a blaze of spring glory. The sun painted the mountains gold and set dew sparkling on fresh grass. Samuel saddled the horses while Aina packed their saddlebags with biscuits and jerky for the day's ride. They rode out together, checking fence lines that stretched across Samuel's land. Aina sat tall in her saddle now, no longer the trembling girl. From the church steps, her dark hair caught the sunlight as she pointed out a hawk circling overhead. Samuel smiled. remembering how unsure she'd been around horses just months ago. The day passed in comfortable rhythm, testing wire strength, replacing rotted posts, sharing quiet conversation. Aina hummed Cherokee songs while they worked, her voice carrying on the wind. Samuel found himself humming along sometimes, though he'd never admit it. As dusk approached, they turned toward home. Golden light bathed the valley, making the ranch house glow like a beacon. Samuel's heart swelled at the sight. What was once a hollow reminder of loss now stood warm with life and purpose. Inside, Aina stirred a pot of hearty stew while Samuel set their wooden bowls on the table. The kitchen filled with savory steam and the comfort of shared routine. Their laughter, hers light as spring rain, his deep as summer thunder, echoed off walls that had known too much silence. Before eating, Samuel bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed, voice rough with emotion, "thank you for second chances. For showing this old fool, your mercy ain't done yet." Ona's small hand found his large one across the table. After they'd cleaned their bowls, Aina leaned against his arm, just as she had that first snowy day. "You looked lonely," she said softly, joy making her eyes bright. "I was tired of crying alone. Now we're not either anymore." Samuel had to swipe at his eyes before he could speak. "Reckon God knew what he was about," he managed. "Knew we both needed family." Through the window, their land stretched vast and free in the gathering dusk, the ranch standing secure after all their struggles. The kitchen glowed with lamplight, so different from the empty shell it had been. Here sat two souls once broken by loss and loneliness, now made whole in the finding of each other. Their laughter mingled with the fire's crackle, father and daughter. In all the ways that truly mattered, their hearts healed by faith and love's patient work. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.